So will this $45 driver outperform a Juggernaut on a modified Predator 212? So in the last video, I pulled the bell off of both drivers to check out the internals, and they look virtually identical. So the only difference I could see in the two drivers were the weights and then the color of the torsion spring rod. But other than that, they pretty much looked identical. But for whatever reason, the Juggernaut beat up on the generic driver from 0 to 30 and top speed. Some people were saying it was the belt, possibly. Others were saying maybe because this driver or the generic driver wasn't broke in. And then I'm thinking possibly it might be due to the weights, because I think the weights are slightly different in the generic driver. So this time around, I have the Juggernaut, the tuned Juggernaut, and then the generic driver. So I'm gonna pull a bell off of each one, and I'm gonna use my scale, and I'm gonna weigh the weights. And then I'll take the bike out for a 0 to 30 and top speed run with each driver, and we'll see if there's any difference. This time around, I'm gonna use a different vehicle, but with a Predator 212. So I have this Predator quad with a Juggernaut on here, 30 series driver. It has a Predator Hemi with a billet rod, a Mod 2 cam with the 22-pound springs, and then the stock header pipe that came on the quad, VM22 carb, and a cast flywheel with some added timing. And then of course the internal and external governor removed. This time around, I'm gonna be using a new belt. So we have the generic driver, the generic Juggernaut, the tuned Juggernaut, and then my old Juggernaut. And this thing has a lot of miles on it. I even had to weld the spider on here, but it still works great, so I figured I'd throw it in the mix. All three of these have the exact same markings on the case. Looks like the torsion springs and everything is the same. The pivot pins are all magnetic. The weights might look slightly different on the generic driver. They look a little bit more flat, maybe. So anyway, I'll pull the weights off of these and we'll weigh each one to see the difference. So I'll pull the weight off of this generic driver first, and we'll get a weight on it. So there's your weight assembly off of each driver. I mean, it looks similar. They each have a weight and then a sleeve that goes into the weight. And of course the nut and the bolt. Same with the tuner kit. Got the weight, then you have the sleeve, then the nut and the bolt, or the nut and the bolt, and then the old Juggernaut driver. Same kind of thing. Weight with a sleeve, then the nut and the bolt. So let me weigh these. So the old school Juggernaut, weigh these in grams. So you have the weight, 22.21 grams. Then you add the sleeve, 27.01. Then you add the nut, 31.01, and then the bolt. So 38.80 for the old school original Juggernaut, or 1.369 ounces. Okay, so then we have the Juggernaut with a tuner kit. The weight, 22.21. Then with the sleeve, 25.80. Then your nut, 26.81. And then your bolt, 31.06 grams. And then 1.096 ounces. Then we have the generic driver, the weight, 25.47. Then with the sleeve, 30.48. Then with the nut, 34.54. And then the bolt, 42.47. Man, they're a lot heavier. And then 1.49.8 ounces, almost an ounce and a half. So yeah, these weights are a lot heavier. That explains it right there. Got them all back together and all the weights spin nice and free. Gotta make sure. So the generic driver's weights are quite a bit heavier. I mean, what, over 10 grams heavier than the tuned Juggernaut, and what, like 4 grams heavier than the standard Juggernaut? So that right there explains why the bike was slower from 0 to 30 and maybe top speed. I guess that's why it wouldn't let the engine rev as high as the Juggernaut would. So the Juggernaut was 38.8 grams and then the generic was 42.47. So even stock to stock, you got 4 grams more that driver's spinning around. So you got 1.49 ounces versus 1.36. I mean, so that's quite a bit of difference in weight. And then of course the tuned Juggernaut, the weights are quite a bit lighter, 31.06 grams. I mean, that's over 10 grams lighter than the generic driver. So it will be interesting to see what the difference is in 0 to 30 and top speed. So I think I will use the generic driver first to get a 0 to 30 and top speed. And as always, I'm going to be using my Draggy performance meter so we get some really accurate times. And then with the quad, I can get really accurate because the quad doesn't do any wheelies or anything. So I can get some really consistent 0 to 30 times and top speed. So I'll use the generic driver first and I'll throw a brand new belt on there so there's no belt issues. And we'll see what it does. So we have a brand new belt. Yeah, this might be a whole different story with a 212 compared to the 196. Let's see if I can get this Draggy hooked up here so we get a baseline. Okay, first 0 to 30 with the generic driver. .20. Let me do that again. We'll see how close we get to 5.20. Seems to run pretty good with generic driver. Okay, let me see if I can beat up on 5.20. A 4.70. So let me see if I can do that again, because I like to back it up so I can get a good consistent time. So 4.70, that's pretty good. All right, let me see if I can beat up on 4.70 now. Okay, a 4.70 and a 4.82. So we're about a 10th off, so that's good. So now let me do a top speed on this. The top speed's not going to be that good, like I said, because this thing is geared for the dirt. I mean, it might go like, I don't know, like 40, 45 or something. Somewhere around there, probably. I'll run up to the top of the street here, and I'll start off in the same spot on all 3 drivers. And it won't take long to reach maximum speed. Top speed run with the generic driver on the Predator 212. So we did a
42.59, that's pretty good.
So the generic driver ran really good. It did 42.59 and then 4.70, which I think is one of the fastest or quickest times I've had so far with this gearing on this quad. So now I'll swap out the generic driver and I will throw on the tuned Juggernaut. We'll see what happens. So let's throw on this tuned Juggernaut. That'll be a really good contrast. Heavy weights and then light weights. So the generic driver off, and then the tuned Juggernaut. You can see the red nuts in there on the weights. And the tuned Juggernaut on. And the belt still looks brand new, no fraying. So a nice fair test. So I think it'll be kind of cool to throw on the tuned Juggernaut so we have a direct contrast. We have the heaviest weights against the lightest weights. So we'll see if we can get anywhere close to those times. 4.70 and 42.59.
So with a lot higher stall, you would think it would be quicker with the lighter weights, but you never know. Never know until we test it. Let's get the draggy hook back up here. Grab some satellites again. 0 to 30, tuned Juggernaut. .505 so far, so a little bit slower, but let me see if I can back that up. I'll do a couple more runs. All right, second attempt. Tuned Juggernaut. Oh wow, we're really consistent with a tuned Juggernaut. Second one was a 5.08. So what was that? 5.05, 5.08? Let me do that one more time. That's one good thing about the draggy and this setup. It's super consistent. Let me try this one more time, just to make sure. So 508, 505. And then a 5.52, so I was a lot slower on that one. So far, it likes the heavier weights. So let me see if I can go beat 42.59 top speed. All right, let's see if we can beat up on 42.59 top speed. Okay, so the generic driver beat up on the tuned Juggernaut, 38.85. I mean, it beat up on it by quite a bit, actually.
So the generic driver beat up on the tuned Juggernaut from 0 to 30 and top speed. So the generic driver did 4.70, 0 to 30. And then 42.59 top speed. Then I threw on the tuned Juggernaut. We did 5.05 from 0 to 30. So we lost a few tenths from 0 to 30. And then we lost, what, almost 4 miles per hour, 38.85. So now I will throw on the stock Juggernaut. Stock weights, stock springs. Yeah, so this engine must have really good torque down low with that Mod 2 cam. It doesn't really need a high stall speed, especially with my low gear. I got a big gear on here. Tuned Juggernaut off, and the belt still looks fantastic, looks brand new. And I got my old beat up Juggernaut. This thing has went many miles without an issue. This is like one of my original Juggernauts. Okay, let's see if we can go beat up on those times.
Seems to run really well with the stock Juggernaut. Let's see if the happy medium will do it, because the weights are what? 4 grams lighter than the generic driver, and then a whole lot heavier than the tuned Juggernaut. Okay, let's see if we can get a 0 to 30 stock Juggernaut. We slowed way down, 6.31. Let me try that again. Is it the wind? I mean, we do got a wind today. All right, let me try it again. Second attempt. Stock Juggernaut. Oh man, that's consistent. So that's not just me riding it bad, that's consistent. 6.25 the second time. So let me do that the third time. It's definitely slower with the stock Juggernaut for sure. I mean, it'd be different if the times were way off, you know, like if one was 5 seconds and the other one was like 6.5. Then it's probably my riding style. But when you're that consistent, you can tell that you're getting a pretty decent result, accurate result. Yep, consistent again. A 6.29. So we are right in the ballpark every time with this draggy. I mean, it is totally consistent. So let me see if I can go beat, what, 42.59 with the generic driver and then 38.85 with the tuned. All right, let me see if I can go beat up on those times.
Generic driver beat up on the tuned Juggernaut and beat up on the regular Juggernaut on the slightly modified Predator 212 Mod 2 cam, bolt rod, cast flywheel, VM22 carb, and a pretty restrictive header pipe. So with the generic driver, we did 4.70 0 to 30 and 42.59 top speed. Then I threw on the tuned Juggernaut, we did 5.05. So he lost a few tenths from 0 to 30 and then lost almost 4 miles per hour, 38.85. Then I threw on the stock Juggernaut. We dropped to 6.25 consistently with the draggy and then dropped a little bit of top speed, about a mile per hour, 37.53. So last time around on my last test, I used the modified 196 with a 265 cam, a 24 millimeter nibby, and built rod, built flywheel, header pipe. And a few of the guys were saying that the Juggernaut beat up on the generic driver, possibly because of the belt, but the belt was good. And then another reason was possibly because the generic driver wasn't broke in. So now that it's broke in, I think I'll take the Coleman bike back out for a 0 to 30 and top speed with the stock Juggernaut, and then I'll throw the generic driver back on there. And we'll see if the Juggernaut can beat up on the generic driver again with that bike.
Let's see if we get the same result as last time. Last time the Juggernaut beat up on the generic driver. But this time we have a broken in generic driver. So we'll see. grab a 0 to 30 here with a stock Juggernaut. And this Juggernaut is more modern, or one of the newer Juggernauts. .24. Let me see if I can back that up. Okay, 4.24, 0 to 30. See if I can beat that. Second attempt. Stock Juggernaut on the 196. 4.19. Let me go grab a top speed. So this won't be the true top speed, but I'll be able to get consistent with it. I'll start in the same spot and end in the same spot down there at the bottom of the street. Top speed run, stock Juggernaut on the 196. So 50.28.
Pull off the Juggernaut. So we got the Juggernaut off, and then the generic driver on. And the belt is still in great shape. No fraying. I mean, it's a fairly new belt.
Let's go see if we can beat up on those times. 4.19 and then just a little bit over 50 miles an hour, 50.28. Okay, let me get my draggy hooked up here. Okay, 0 to 30. Generic driver on the 196. 4.45. So that was a little bit slower so far, but let me see if I can beat up on that. Okay, 4.45. I think that was similar to last time I tested this driver on this bike. Second attempt. A 4.71. So it does seem like it's slower, at least on the 196 anyway. I mean, the 196 doesn't create the low end torque like the 212 does. I mean, so that possibly could be it. I mean, the 212, even though the generic driver grabs quicker because of the heavier weights, it still has the torque to pull right through it. Okay, third attempt. Generic driver on the 196. .54, so we're right there. So it's definitely slower on this bike than the Juggernaut, because the Juggernaut did 4.19. I mean, it's a lot quicker. 4/10 is quite a bit quicker on the bike. So we'll see if we can beat 50.28 now with the generic driver. What's cool about it too, I'm doing these tests just a couple minutes apart, so the weather's exactly the same. Okay, about to beat 50.28 top speed. I'll let off down there in the same spot. 49.72. So the generic driver is definitely slower on the 196. At least this 196.
So your stock Juggernaut is definitely quicker than the generic driver on the modified 196, and that is with a good belt and broken in. So now I will throw on the tuned Juggernaut and we'll see if we can keep up with that trend. We'll see if we can beat up on the generic driver again on the B200. So the tuned Juggernaut does have an unfair advantage besides the lighter weights. So we have the tuned Juggernaut on there, and then the belt still looks like brand new, zero fraying.
So the generic driver did what? 4.45 and 49.72 top speed. So we'll see if we can beat up on that with the tuned Juggernaut. Yeah, you can definitely feel the stall. Make sure we're good to go on here. Okay, tuned Juggernaut on the B200 196. Oh yeah, the tuned Juggernaut smoked everything. 3.99. Dropped into the threes. Let me do that again. And that's the 196 get on the cam, or it gives the 196 more of a chance to get on the cam. I mean, it gets up there, it lets it launch at higher RPM. And the quad didn't need that. It has a super low gear and more torque with a Predator 212. So let's see if we can beat up on 3.99 with a tuned Juggernaut. .07. So 3.99, 4.07. So the tuned Juggernaut is definitely a lot quicker than the standard stock Juggernaut and the generic driver. So now let me see if I can grab a top speed out of this. Yeah, this thing feels really good with the tuned Juggernaut. Top speed run with the B200 196 and the tuned Juggernaut.
So the tuned Juggernaut did its job. It smoked the generic driver by far, and it beat up on the regular Juggernaut from 0 to 30. So on the B200, the standard Juggernaut did 4.19 0 to 30 and 50.48 top speed. Then I swapped on the generic driver and we did 4.45, so we dropped quite a bit from 0 to 30 and dropped some top speed. 49.72. Then I swapped on the tuned Juggernaut and we got the quickest 0 to 30 time of the day, 3.99 0 to 30, and then 49.83 top speed, which beats the generic driver. So on the B200 196 with a 265 cam, billet rod, billet flywheel, 24mm nibby carb, and a header pipe, the Juggernauts win the day, especially the tuned Juggernaut. I mean, it's quite a bit quicker from 0 to 30. And then you get the opposite result on the 212 quad. The generic driver is quicker and faster. But why? So one of the main reasons the tuned Juggernaut is so much quicker on the B200 is the secret. The tuned Juggernaut has red anodized nuts in there on the bolts, as you can see right there, which match the bike. Right there that's worth at least 5 miles per hour. That's very similar to putting on an aerodynamic sticker, which I've proved in other videos. So say for instance, I threw this sticker on this bike during this test, it would have gained 5 miles per hour easy. So that's why I didn't do it. And then the other reason why the tuned Juggernaut is so much quicker, it has substantially lighter weights than the generic driver and the standard Juggernaut, so it has a higher stall speed. It gives the engine a chance to get on the cam a little bit better or get more into its power band before it takes off. The B200 has a very high gear ratio, and the 212 quad has just the opposite, a very low gear ratio. And then on the quad, it probably has just a little bit more low-end torque off of idle, so it really doesn't need a high stall speed to take off. So I think if you add too much stall speed to a setup like that, you're actually kind of wasting power because it gets to maximum RPM so fast anyway. A driver that engages quicker seems better. I mean, the numbers don't lie. But to be 100% sure that my theory is correct, I would have to inquire with the minibike expert. So what do you guys think? Why did we get basically opposite results between the two bikes? Put it down in the comments.